Good afternoon, friends. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. I've been super excited about this content and our guest, who is doing amazing work on behalf of the industry in helping drive policy toward things that benefit our community. So I'm super eager to introduce you to Kathlyn McHenry in just a minute and talk about the work that she's doing on the state level and her expectations for what the future holds and whatever great nuggets she has for us on things that we can bring to our own states. So excited to have you guys here and joining us as usual. Please put your questions as you think of them in the Q&A bar to the right. We will try to take some as we go. We will also stop 15 to 20 minutes ahead of 2 o'clock or whatever your time zone is and focus on the things that are important to you. Also, we have 2 polls during the content of this webinar. So you'll also see your poll icon to the right, and we'll introduce those at certain points, and you can just click on poll, give us your answer. We'll see what others' experience is. Excuse me in advance, South Carolina and the pollen, crazy right now. So I have a few things. This is my HINGE team. We're always here for you guys. If you have questions, if you want to spitball what's going on in the industry, it's absolutely our favorite thing to talk about. Look out for registration for this year's SHIFT conference. I was just trying to arm wrestle Kathlyn into coming, and she's always so gracious with her time and information. And I feel like every couple of months we need to check in on where states are and what their work is and what we might bring to our own state. So registration opens August the 1st. Be on the lookout for that. Love to see you guys there. We have a QuickBooks training coming up. So I think a lot of our guests know that we have put a big focus on an industry-specific QuickBooks training that is going incredibly well. So we have one set for April 23rd. We still have a few slots available for that. Feel free to go to our website at Hinge Advisors and Financial Coaching and register for that. Love to see you guys there. Here's our Dynamo financial services team, Christine, Stephanie, and Zach, who are working with governments and individuals across the country to help them be as financially healthy as they can be. And certainly in changing financial dynamic times like we're in right now, we need all the to be as diligent as possible about our financial modeling. So if that's of interest, join that. If you need something else financially, reach out. Happy to support. Here's some ways you guys can get attached to us on social. We announce our events here. We, would love to have your input on what else we can do to support you in the community. So certainly get attached to us if you're not already. So I would love to introduce Kathlyn McHenry and the work that she's doing. Hi.
Hi.
Hey. Thank you so much for your time. And, for people, I know that we have stolen a lot of your very valuable time. So a lot of our community knows you, but for anyone who doesn't, could you tell us about yourself, also the work of the ECEC in general, and then the work that you do on behalf of ECEC?
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Kathy, for having me today. We really appreciate our partnership with you and Hinge. And so we're excited for the SHIFT conference later this year. We will definitely be there. and excited to speak with all of you today. So my name is Kathlyn McHenry. I'm one of the 2 directors of state government relations for the Early Care and Education Consortium, or ECEC. So ECEC is a little mouthful, but we are a nationwide nonprofit organization of high quality licensed childcare providers, key state childcare associations, and education service providers. Our members operate in almost every single state with about 7,000 programs across the country and the capacity to serve around 1 million children every single day. So we really are the voice at the national level and in many states for providers. So we advocate at the federal and at the state level for improved childcare policies that improve business practices for providers, and then of course improve access and affordability for families. So as I mentioned, I'm one of ECEC's 2 directors of state government relations. My colleague Elsa and I manage work across about 20 states where our members have the largest footprint. And so again, we advocate for stronger policies, better funding at the state level.
Fantastic. And we all so appreciate the work that you guys have done. And I know that there has been a big shift from a focus on the federal level, although I'm sure you guys are not completely, throwing your hands up and saying we're done here. But can you talk to us a little bit before we jump into the state specific content? Can you give us a quick update on what you guys think about what's happening on the federal level, if anything?
Yeah, of course. So I think, at a really high level at the federal, from the federal perspective, it's really unlikely that we're going to see investments at the level that we saw during COVID. Of course, during COVID, there were huge investments made in the childcare industry to keep the industry afloat. And states were able to use that funding for several years, which of course benefited providers and families. But we really don't expect that level of investment to be made again. I will say that this is an election year. So the potential exception to that is if we were to see a Democratic trifecta where Democrats win control of the House, the Senate, and retain control of the presidency. Even then, there's not agreement within the party about kind of the path forward with regard to early learning policy and childcare. So I think that's still a really big unknown. And of course, we don't know what the outcome of the election will be. So just a caveat there. And, it is predicted that the House and the Senate will both flip. So the House would be controlled by Democrats and the Senate would be controlled by Republicans. In that case, the Congress would likely continue prioritizing funding for the Child Care and Development Block Grant, the existing federal program for childcare. But the prospect of major childcare funding is probably most dependent on who controls the White House. So again, not to get into too many details there, but I think a lot of this will kind of come down to the outcome of the elections later this year. But we've been focusing our work on the annual appropriations process for the Child Care and Development Block Grant. Again, that's the main federal program that provides financial support to working families to help them afford childcare. In March, Congress passed an appropriations package finally after punting it for several months. And that bill included a $725 million increase in funding for the block grant, bringing the total amount of funding to $8.75 billion. Now, this is really exciting. It was an incredibly difficult year for appropriations, and nearly all education programs were cut in the original House proposal. And in the Senate proposal, there originally was a $700 million increase. So we had expected something in between 0 and 700. Ultimately, this $725 million increase is a huge testament to the bipartisan support for the program. lawmakers on both sides of the aisle prioritize this funding amidst cuts to many other programs or flat funding. So we're really excited about that. We worked really hard to advocate for that funding over many, many months. So again, that's really exciting. It also helps work towards our goal and many others' goal of doubling the program by 2027. So that would be about $12.3 billion by 2027. With this additional funding, we're on track towards that goal, which is great news. I did want to mention, kind of with that funding, many might expect that states will be able to serve additional families, increase reimbursement rates. Now, that's true, but many of you may have also heard that the federal government recently finalized new rules for the program with lots of wonderful policies in those rules. One of the main things you may have heard is that family co-payments will now be capped at 7% of a family's income. Also some great things in there for providers, including requiring states pay providers based on enrollment rather than attendance and on time, which I know is an issue in a lot of places. So again, lots of great things in that rule. However, they do cost money. So this additional investment from the federal government will help states implement a lot of the policies in that new rule, but will unlikely be a major dent in the amount of children to be served. And we could go ahead and ask our poll question now. Have you prepared for the expiration of those federal relief dollars that we just discussed? I'd love to learn kind of where everybody's at with that.
Yeah, terrific. As our guests are weighing in on that, so again, hover over to the right of your bar, you'll see a polls section. It may have just popped up on your screen. So if you will choose, how have you prepared for the expiration of federal relief dollars, which largely expired in September? Have you not prepared? Are you still weighing options? Did you increase tuition in preparation? Did you decrease salaries or benefits? Did you stop giving employee bonuses? Has your state invested enough that you are still balanced? Have you not had to make major decisions or something else? So interesting. So we're weighing heavily on increased tuition, which is actually something that we have been very strongly recommending to providers for the last couple of years, that in preparation for that funding no longer being available, that we were going to be at the place where we had to rely on parent pay dollars to pay the pricing differential that has happened. So we have predicted, and I've seen this verified with several independent company research projects, that salaries have increased about 30% since COVID. And so with that model and us typically spending 55 to 65% of parent dollars on staff-related costs, there's no way that balances if you're relying on grant monies to fund part of it. And I realize that in some areas and with some parent groups, there's a limit to what you can do with increasing tuition. But we saw some aggression among a lot of companies who have now flattened that out, because they started to see a little pushback this year from parents who said, okay, we get it, but enough, but it looks like your biggest response is on increased tuition, followed by haven't had to make major changes because I've invested relief dollars in short-term projects. So I know there's a lot of expansion that happened from that. Stop giving employee bonuses and still weighing options. So the employee bonuses is a tough one. because it's just like increased pay. When you stop giving something, it's difficult and it might be expected. And it would be interesting to know if anyone has experienced any friction with those employees who no longer have it. But what are your takes on this poll?
Yeah, that's about what we've been hearing as well. A lot of increased tuition. I mean, that's the way you make your income and pay your bills and pay your staff. So that tracks with what we're hearing. I think it's great to see that there's a good chunk of attendees who haven't had to make major changes because they invested in short-term projects. I know that was another recommendation a lot of folks were giving. With these dollars, we know they're going to end, so don't invest them in things that are longer term because those are harder to pull back. I'm curious who lives in a state where their state has invested enough funds to keep them stable in the future, and which state that is. I'm wondering if it's Minnesota or another state. So I'm curious who that person is.
Yeah, super interesting. If I could ask you one question on the federal level, then I'd love to dive in to the detail on the states. And we have one question from a guest. So question on the increase in the Child Development Block Grant Program. If there's a requirement that families are capped at 7% of their income, who is funding the difference there? So is it the provider that has to, because in some states you can't even charge families the difference in the market rate and the subsidy rate. So where's that funding? Is it from the Child Development Block Grant Program?
That's a really good question, Kathy. So in the proposed rules, the first version, we were very worried about that because it didn't specify that states needed to make up that difference. So we were very worried that providers would be on the hook for that, or families would be on the hook for charging that difference or paying that difference in states where that is allowed. So we strongly recommended that the federal government clarified that states needed to make up that difference. And in the final rule, they did add language stating that states should make up that any difference in the co-payments. And so we do expect that states will make any necessary changes to make sure that providers remain whole. And we've spoken to a couple of states where that's the case. The way that they calculate reimbursement rates is, okay, here's the reimbursement rate minus the parent co-payment, and the state pays the rest. So it should be providers will, essentially continue bringing in the same amount.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to spend too much time on federal things, but get on a tangent here. So I know that there's been some strong work around market rates and a difference of opinion in different states about what constitutes a market rate. When I think the majority of providers really feel like that the given rate for subsidy in their state doesn't reflect what it cost before COVID and much less now. So has there been some modeling or good work anywhere that shows the effect of market rate and what that actually is?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I actually do think that's more of a state question. So you're good. There are several states that are starting to move towards what we're calling a cost of care or a cost of quality model, where instead of surveying, the market rate survey is basically a representative survey of childcare providers asking them, what do you charge for services? There are many flaws with that. And then of course, states only pay a percentage of that. A cost of care or a cost of quality survey tries to get at what does it actually cost to provide services, and you could consider high quality services in rural areas, infants versus preschoolers. So lots of different levers you can pull. And many states are starting to look into this as a way to improve reimbursement rates, or at least use it as a comparison towards their market rate survey. So how far off are we really, and how, how much below the true cost of care are we really reimbursing? So I know North Carolina just kind of finished conducting a study on this that was really comprehensive. It's not published yet, but we're excited to see those results. There are only a couple of states who have a cost model approved by the federal government to use instead of the market rate survey. Virginia, New Mexico, I think DC. So those results are really interesting, and not a surprise. They show that the market rates are lower than those cost of quality studies.
Yeah, let me help. I'll help you lobby that one. I've got some information on what it actually costs, and I feel very passionately about it. I'm sure all of our guests here do. I'll speak for us all. We will certainly support. Before we leave the Change in Child Development Block Grant, one of our guests would like to know when the new rules that just passed take effect.
Oh, that's a good question. They, I think, technically become effective maybe in May. I can get back to you with the date that's technically effective. But what I will say is that there are various dates where states have to comply with all of the rules. So that date that it has to go into effect isn't as meaningful. States do have the option to request a waiver for up to 2 years to implement a lot of these policies. And what we're hearing is that states are really likely to use that waiver authority or process because, again, they don't have the money to fully implement it. They need to update their technology systems in a lot of cases. That takes time. They're also going through, and to your point, not to get too in the weeds here, but they're going through the process of rewriting their state plans for the next couple of years. And so a lot of them had been halfway through this process and the new rules came out. And so there's, all these different kind of confluence of factors at the state level that I think that we're likely to see states kind of push this out a year or two.
And I suspect it's the on-time component and the lack of technology or funding that causes the heartburn on the state. Okay.
Yeah. All of it.
Okay, all the things. We also have a guest that wants to know if there's one central place that announces upcoming ECE grant funding or RFPs for the states to encourage best planning and more involvement of new vendors and qualified participants for those funding opportunities. Is there a central place?
That's a really good question. Unfortunately, there's not, and I can tell you that because we've been tracking this for our members, and you have to go to every state website. And in some cases, they're locally offered. So you, like in Florida, you've got to go to the local early learning coalition. So I would recommend, in the states that you're operating to get on all the listservs for the agency that you work with. They're typically pretty good about communicating those opportunities to providers. So I would just, again, recommend getting on that listserv and keeping an eye on the state's websites. Okay.
Thank you. Let's jump into the states in a little more detail. So I actually have a favorite strategy that I'm seeing emerge in the states, but I wonder if you have one. What, if you do, what is?
Oh, that's a really good question. Maybe I won't speak for me personally. I'll say, and I think I'm curious to know if this is the same one. One of the most popular strategies that keeps coming up and I keep getting asked about because it really just helps everybody in this industry is this trend that we're seeing to support childcare for early educators. Perfect, great minds think alike. So this is that Kentucky model where Kentucky was kind of the first to really be out there on this. They offered categorical eligibility for childcare to early educators, meaning if you were an early educator, you could get access to a childcare subsidy regardless of your income. Really, really positive, amazing results. Several states have followed suit there. We're seeing, I think there's at least 15 states who've done something similar and many, many others who where there are pending legislation or, proposals in the works to create a similar program. Some of that was one-time funding, so they'll have to figure out ongoing resources to cover that. But yes, it supports workforce recruitment and retention, which of course supports childcare businesses, expands access to childcare for others when you've got teachers in the classroom. So it's a really wonderful strategy.
Yeah, I love this so much for so many reasons. First of all, typical discounting for teachers or directors or management would include free childcare for managers and half-price childcare for teachers. So first of all, when you can market yourself to a workforce and they know that they can bring their child for free, and the school is not discounting that tuition, which can be a huge cost load on a school, then everyone wins, really. The teacher wins, the school wins, the children win, they've got better teachers, the financial picture in the school is stronger. I'm such a fan of this. I'm everywhere saying to people, go to your state legislators. This is what they could do with some of their money. So it's a great model that I really love. And I'm very excited to hear, because I could probably have heard of a handful of states that have implemented, but really happy to hear you say that there are 15 that are either implementing or considering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and some of them are smaller pilot programs. Arizona, Georgia, Montana used preschool development grant funding for this. So some of them are smaller, but we're hoping that the benefit of them really shines through.
Right. Awesome. Do you have any others that are outstanding to you?
Arkansas is another state that recently made childcare workers categorically eligible. I think Colorado's looking to do the same. Indiana, Nebraska, Michigan, New Jersey all have bills out there. So we're hoping that will pass. Massachusetts and Rhode Island have ongoing kind of pilot projects. There's other creative ways to do it where you can, reduce co-payments down to $1 or something really minimal for early educators. The challenge in some states becomes if there's a really long wait list, then what happens to those families that are already on the wait list. So there's different things that I think states are weighing and some creative solutions to address this.
Fantastic. So let's talk about the positives, because there always are. What states do you feel are doing a great job, big focus on childcare, good strategies that balance both the needs of parents and providers? Where do you think good work is happening with a focus on childcare?
Yeah, I love to highlight the good examples. I'll mention a couple. So this year, Florida actually is a state that I think did a really, really great job. They just wrapped up their legislative session a couple of weeks ago, and they invested almost $100 million in state funding for early childhood, mostly in the child care assistance program. So they did a couple of things with that funding. First, they increased reimbursement rates, which was kind of our number one priority there. They needed to be increased. Simultaneously, they expanded access to more families by reducing the wait list, but also by creating what they're calling a School Readiness Plus program, which will support families who are in that missing middle that we often talk about, families who make too much to qualify for assistance, but still struggle to afford childcare and therefore are likely to leave the workforce, reduce their hours, etc. So they dedicated a pretty sizable amount of funding to support families who are in that boat, which is really exciting, and I think will be very something we'll point to other states and hope that they can replicate. They also invested in their pre-K program, but most of the funding was, again, to both providers and families. Georgia just also recently wrapped up their legislative session. They kind of went the opposite path, and they made most of their major investments in the pre-K program this year, including to increase teacher salaries. They actually just did a really creative thing where they are going to reduce class sizes, but it's this methodical 4-year approach where they're adding classrooms. So there are grants to open new classrooms. The funding per classroom will not change. So even though you'll have less students in a classroom, your income won't change, and might actually increase given the teacher salary component I mentioned. So that was wonderful. The governor, was really on board with that. Just a high level of support in Georgia. I mentioned those two states because I think we often talk a lot about progressive states and the investments that they're making. And I could go into great detail, but there are more conservative states who have been making investments. I could go down the list. Last year, Minnesota made some historic investments in the childcare and early learning space. They're looking to continue that again this year by expanding access to more families and reducing family expenses. So there are a lot of really great, wonderful examples of states that are doing positive things.
Wonderful. And I'd like to invite our guests to know that your state is doing something terrific. Pop it in our Q&A box so we can all learn from you and from the things that you're finding that are working well. You mentioned businesses a little bit, and this is a little toe dip back into federal business, but we watched with great interest the childcare requirement for CHIPS funding. So CHIPS funding, I'll let you explain that a little bit better, but I wonder if you expect that we'll see some tack-on requirements for childcare for employees if they receive certain types of federal funding. Would that be a way that the federal government might inject more investment in the industry indirectly?
It could be. And I think the challenge with the CHIPS Act, with the semiconductor, industry, this one in particular, but the thing that we're hearing, is that it's kind of the chicken or the egg. Like, you build a childcare center and then, your employees come, or kind of the other way around. I think the business community, maybe taking a step higher, is getting very, very involved at the state and the federal level in the childcare conversation, and that we're seeing positive outcomes of that. In a lot of states, when the chambers of commerce are getting involved, I think the Chamber of Commerce in Kentucky was really the one to lead this childcare for early educators project. In a lot of other states, tax credits, they're pushing those to help them invest in childcare for their employees. So there are, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of not answering your question, but there are a couple of tax credits at the federal level that businesses can partake in. And that's something that we're really looking at as a way to support the business industry broadly. If you go at one industry by industry, I think that's a little bit more difficult. And so having the ability for small businesses, large businesses, consortiums of businesses to have an incentive to offer childcare benefits to their employees, I think that's kind of the approach that we're looking at. And we're hoping that the federal tax package will come together in the next 2-ish years. So kind of building the foundations for that in the future.
Awesome. Yeah, I really feel like for us to get anywhere close to resolving this, where parents and direct subsidies can pay for services, but there's a limit. There's a ceiling on those, and our costs are rising above that ceiling. So I really feel like it's going to take a combination of direct subsidies from government plus tax incentives and investment from businesses for us to get anywhere close to resolving this disparity. Okay.
Absolutely. And I will say, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but I will say that states are recognizing that too. And I think a trend that I'm seeing across the country is, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but states looking to address this through their tax code. There's a couple of different states that are doing this, and it is often driven by the business community. So tax incentives for businesses to either contract out with a childcare provider or build an on-site or a near-site facility and contract out. That's something that I think we'll see increasingly in the coming years.
Awesome. Thank you. We have a guest question. If you want to open a new center, are there any grants you know of in Texas or, any state for expansion or the construction or purchase of new schools?
Yes. In Texas specifically, there was a pretty large grant program that unfortunately has now closed. It was funded with federal relief dollars, and it was for the expansion or startup of a new childcare facility. A lot of states did create similar programs with their COVID relief dollars to try to expand access, develop new programs, and kind of prevent those closures we were hearing about. So many other states did that. It's not something I'm seeing a lot of states continue to do. It does cost a lot of money, as you of course know, to open or expand or do capital construction. So it's unfortunately not something I'm seeing states really kind of pick up and continue.
Are there any efforts toward expansion or development of childcare opportunities and childcare deserts that, we're all hearing so much about? Are there any incentives there?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think with those programs that I was mentioning, there was often a prioritization of locations in childcare deserts. And some states do offer, I think someone in the chat mentioned, you can get a quality increase in your reimbursement rate if you're considered high quality. I think some states might do that, and depending on particular areas of the state. Unfortunately, the federal funding can't be used for construction or major renovation. And so that's a huge barrier because it all has to come from a state general fund or another state revenue source. So it's just, I think there's a big interest in addressing deserts, but I haven't seen, this major trend. And that's not to say that those programs don't exist, but it's not so every state has a program to help you create a program in a childcare desert.
Right. Okay. Before we leave the great things that are happening, is there anything else that comes to mind for you that is a good model? Is a state who's progressive? Did we hit all the exciting things that are happening?
We could go on, and I'm sure. One thing I thought, I'd mention that it's a slow trend or a new trend, I think, but it's getting a lot of interest is property taxes. And
yes.
There are only a couple of states that are addressing this, but it's something I keep hearing about. Last year in Texas, voters approved by a 2/3 margin the ability for localities to exempt childcare providers from property taxes. And since then, almost every large city and county has approved this exemption. So really exciting. And obviously, a state like Texas, you can use that example across the country. They're so big. And so that's a great example. And it's reducing expenses for childcare providers in any way, of course, is a policy that we're going to support. So that's exciting. Colorado just passed a law. The governor just signed it. A similar idea, but it's broader than just childcare providers, and it's a rebate program. Florida has a property tax exemption already, but it only applies to providers that own their facility. So that's something we're looking to advocate for changing in the next year. So I'm getting a lot of providers who are really excited about that policy and interested, especially in places where your property taxes are just increasing an astronomical amount. So another just kind of creative solution that's bubbling up.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. We love that model as well. We have worked with the Florida-based property tax exemption for years as we do transactional work there, and it really makes no sense that even if you're responsible for property taxes, if you don't choose to or can't afford to own your own building, then that's not available to you. So it is something that we work with too, but that is a great model as well. Property taxes in some states are very significant. So makes a big difference in some states. Okay. Are there states that you find just to really be sluggish and thinking about the strategies for childcare that are slow to invest in childcare, don't see the benefit? I hate to beat people up, but is that a thing? Are there some? Yeah.
There are definitely those states, unfortunately. And I think, you're right to bring that up, because if there are any attendees from those states, your voice is critically important to those conversations. One of the places that I cover that we're watching really closely and trying to change the trajectory of is Arizona. Arizona for years hasn't put in any funding more than they have to draw down their federal funds, and they're facing the potential of reducing reimbursement rates, creating a wait list for families. The governor had proposed $100 million for the childcare assistance program there, but they're facing a budget deficit, and the politics of the state are just such that it's the path forward is rocky. So that's a state that we're watching. We're concerned about that. To go back to Texas, they're not in session this year, but they're in the same boat. They don't add any funding over what's required by the federal government. And so they didn't make any investments last year. Of course, this year is not, there's not another budget. So next year, really, it's, are they going to put in any funding they've got a wait list of almost 100,000 children, which is atrocious. So that's another state. It's such a big one, unfortunately. And there are others as well. I think Idaho in the past has been one. And so, there are, unfortunately, there are states that we risk seeing, I think, fall behind compared to other states.
Sad. I'll ask you in a few minutes about advocating for our guest here, but someone would like to know if you have any thoughts about Pennsylvania or Ohio and what's happening in those states.
Yeah, Pennsylvania last year made a pretty good state investment in reimbursement rates. They had increased rates with their relief funding, and then the state backfilled their own resources to continue that rate increase at the 75th percentile. They also, they're one of the states that has addressed the tax code for families. So the Child Independent Care Tax Credit is a federal tax credit. A lot of states have their own version. Pennsylvania expanded that last year. So that's really great. They have a longer legislative session, so nothing big coming out of there just yet this year. Ohio, I know that my colleague covers Ohio, and she's talked a lot about the quality system there and the work that they're doing on Step Up to Quality, I think it's called. So I'm happy to follow up with you, with specific details in Ohio if you'd like.
Great, thank you. So hopefully some of our guests have heard some good ideas. It's really difficult, as you know, as a business owner, especially if you're a boots on the ground business owner with day-to-day participation, to take on another role, which can be very time consuming to advocate on your state level, even if there's a childcare association in place to work with that association. And then in some states, there's no association to even lobby on behalf of the industry in that state. So what suggestions do you have to providers, and do you work through state or with state associations?
We do. We have partnerships with state associations, and there are a few state associations who are members of ECEC. So we work particularly closely with them, and they'll come up to DC and advocate with us. But yes, I would certainly recommend looking across your state to see if there's an organization that represents providers. That would be my first recommendation. There often is. There's sometimes not, unfortunately. A lot of providers are starting to, again, kind of participate in their local chambers of commerce, their state chambers of commerce, because of course they represent businesses as well. So sometimes you'll find a friendly ear or voice with the chamber. Get involved with us, shoot me an email. We can help you find out if there's an organization in your state that represents the childcare business industry, or if we're active in that state, then we'd be happy to work with you. So those are a few places I'd start. I know, at the last SHIP conference, I think we had a conversation about starting your own childcare association in the state, and that's how they get started often. I know it's a lot of time, a lot of effort, but oftentimes that's it's a group of providers who just want to be at the table, and they want to have their voice heard because things aren't going the way that they need to be going. So that's also a bridge that we'd love to help you walk over if interested.
Yeah. Fantastic. I think I remember someone in one part of the room saying, we have no state association. And then from the back of the room, someone said, I'm from your state, I'll help you. So
yeah,
that was great. I hope that they were able to get some traction. For clarification, with the new increase in child development block grant funds, are states required to pay subsidy reimbursements on time and by enrollment within 2 years? So that's a federal requirement that they must comply with within 2 years. Is that right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay. All right. We'll see a lot of systems emerge to help with some of those. And I've seen some good ones. I know that is really, in some states, the systems are behind. And
yeah.
Can you share any incentives for New Jersey? Anything going on there?
Yeah, I'm not so. My colleague covers New Jersey, so I'm not exactly sure about incentives right now. If there are any remaining federally funded incentive programs or state-funded programs. I know the big thing going on there is preschool expansion, and the governor, continuing to dedicate and to announce additional funding for preschool expansion. Our work there has really focused on mixed delivery, which we didn't talk too much about today, but essentially ensuring that community-based providers can participate as easily as possible in a state's preschool system and serve those families. So, right now the system is kind of led by schools, but we had championed language to kind of require or strengthen a partnership sort of situation with schools. And so I know that in New Jersey, the preschool conversation is kind of the big conversation. But again, I'm happy to follow up with you and connect you with my colleague for more specifics.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Let's do our second poll. And while we are polling, you guys pop any additional questions that you have in the Q&A box. The questions have been fantastic. And we'd love to hear from everyone. So how confident are you that your state will invest the necessary funds to support providers faced with increasing costs? We're very confident, we're somewhat confident, we're neutral, or we're not confident. We might have to ask folks where they are especially if you're very confident. That's amazing. I'm
It's
just
probably
happy
that same person from before.
yeah, maybe so. I'm just happy that there's a response, that someone is very confident. So I would love for you to pop in the Q&A box and tell us what state you're from. Do you feel confident about? Love to know any other models that anyone else sees. So we're 3% very confident. We're 39%, or the majority is somewhat confident. That's pretty good. We're 25% neutral, and we're 34% not confident. Let's see what comments or questions. This webinar is being recorded, and you will be able to access it. We would love for you to share it with your team or any others. I'm pretty sure all of our webinars are available, but somebody much smarter than me would have to tell us that. I'll get Marissa to text me the answer to that, Marissa, and I'll ask someone much more in tune. Kathlyn, what did we not talk about that you feel like is important? Yes, all are available on demand. There we go. So, what else do you feel like is important for people to know, and what actions should they be taking? What else do we need to be doing?
Everything and anything. I mean, I think, and I will say, I put my email in the chat. I know a lot of folks, I offered to follow up with you. So please shoot me a note. I think it's, if any of this, for those of you who are not the one person who is confident that their state will invest funding, it's so important that we keep up the momentum that was established during the pandemic, when I think this whole country really realized how important the childcare industry is. Those states that I talked about that are doing good things, it's because there are people stepping up, continuing the conversation. It's a variety of people, of groups, of parents, of businesses, childcare providers. So, I think that's just something I wanted to mention, the importance of having your voice heard, and finding a group that's advocating on behalf of you and children and families. It's in the states that we're not seeing investments, that's not due to hard work and strong advocacy, but the more we can do, the more you can have your voice heard, the better chance we have. So just, I guess, a call to action to everybody who's in attendance.
Yeah, it's really hard to imagine sometimes, but a big part of our legislators don't have an experience with childcare. It hasn't been a part of their life plan, their family plan, their need base. And for them to understand the unique challenges that are going on and the impact that spreads so far with available high quality care is just really important to educate people. And so we can't overemphasize that enough. I think we have a couple more comments or questions. What are some resources or names or keywords that we can look for groups to advocate or with financial resources? So,
great question. Victoria, what I would start by, you can search for your state's AEYC. The states have chapters of the National Association of Education for the Young Children, NAEYC. I'll type it in the chat, but they're often a great resource to kind of start with. Some chapters are more active than others, so depending on the state, you might find a large presence or not. I would also search for your state's like childcare business group. So you could search. They're all named something different. So again, if you want to shoot me an email, I can send you some with the state you're looking for in particular, I can help you track a couple down, but you know, that a childcare business group or childcare, you know, business, you know, advocacy organization. There's a kind of different phrases within there that you could try to search. But again, I'm happy to, if you send me an email to help you out there.
Wonderful. Well, we will follow up with you, Kathlyn, and answer some of the questions and get some resources in the hands of our guests. We really appreciate the work that you're doing. I know that, hope you know that it's wide-reaching and important, and it's for the benefit of this group and thousands of teachers and, you know, tens of thousands of families. So thank you for that work and for giving us your time to join today and talk to us about it. I'm sure we'll be dragging you back in front of the camera sometime soon. So thank you for what you're doing.
Please do. We're happy to connect anytime. Thank you so much for this opportunity. It's so important. And again, just really appreciate our partnership. So thank you for having me.
We do as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Kathy. Bye, everybody.
Bye.